Okay, I'm live on YouTube and tickled that YouTube lets me go live, even though I only have 7 subscribers. Mm, okay, I'm live on YouTube another tech glitch. And tickled that YouTube lets me go live, even though I only have 7 subscribers. Mm, okay, okay. So tech learnings, hair learnings. Look, hair and lighting, it's a disaster. But the mood struck me, and here I am. Mm, I have hard things to say, and I don't feel comfortable saying them publicly in front of my friends and family yet. So I come over here and say them publicly in front of nobody on YouTube. It's so interesting, the anonymity of the internet. It's like being public and private. Mm. So I'm here because I have important things to say. I've been very, very scared to say them. And I know I will be saying them. They are coming. I know myself well enough at my age of 55 that if I have a strong, passionate feeling about something, I mean, it becomes a need or a desire. It is my eros, it's my creative desire, then I will find a way to express that energy. And I have a deep desire to share what I got to see really up close and personal in a very compassionate way and an accountable way. So both, right? The compassion and accountability and seeing, I was going to say both sides, but it's really like all sides because there's multiple perspectives. And that's one of my gifts is the multiple perspectives. And I got to see some stuff really up close. And part of the reason I was looking so close at the time was that I was in a state of samadhi. Um, I think I'm probably still would be considered in a mild state of samadhi, but I'm not where I was. If anybody is familiar with Jeffrey Martin's taxonomy, which I'm not sure if he's even using that anymore, but at the time, um, this is back in, I don't know, 2023, I read the finders and I located myself in location 3, or I'd been in location 3. And then my samadhi was disrupted. I don't know if that's the word. Uh, life disrupted. And I was plunged into a deep, deep, deep state of grief from losses, real life losses. And over time, you know, 2022, 2023, 2024. I think about 2024 is where I really lost it. lost whatever state I was in that was different from where I am now. Um, the I feel like where I'm at now is much more integrated. It is much more integrated. I am capable of acting in the world in much more diverse ways than I was when I was in my, let's say, level 3 samadhi. And I would like to describe that for people. But it's I'm more integrated. I'm working towards peace again. But it's always going to be a more integrated peace. In other words, I'm always going to be feeling lows and highs in this integrated state and not in that what I've come to believe, at least for most people, is a false mind-based level of equanimity that is maintained through agreements in the mind, made in the mind. And that's exhausting and it's not sustainable. That's my belief or assertion or conjecture, if you want to call it that. Uh, and I can point to, burgeoning evidence of such from multiple perspectives. We can look at case studies. We can also look at the actual research that has looked at emotional denial, suppression, and repression, and the cost to the system, neurologically, energetically. But I am deflecting. I'm noticing that I'm going up into my head to prevent myself from saying what I really need to say. Well, I want to practice saying. I'm here to practice. I'm just here to practice. And I would like to practice saying, I got a close-up view to what I would label misogyny. And it wasn't just against me as a woman. Obviously, I am a woman in a woman's body, born a woman. And I was in an extra feminine expression of myself when I was in samadhi. And it's taken me now 4 years to start talking about this because, first of all, I had to accept I didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't know the word samadhi. I didn't believe I was enlightened. The term I was using at the time, I believe, and I can go back and confirm when I started actually using different terms in different ways. But I believe I was using the term awakening as a verb. It was very clear to me that there was a lot of blind spots in me while I was clearly having this expansive experience where I suddenly understand the perennial wisdom, basically. That's what happens. You want a short, succinct idea of what happens? That's what happens. And so then you move through the world, and I mean, another thing that happened for me that is very common that makes us recognizable to each other is that there was a settling of the nervous system for me, that brought me from a fundamental, I would say, distrust of life and all that is into and a feeling of separateness and a belief in separateness and a belief that this life is all that is, and a materialist perspective, basically. I say basically because I was also very, very involved in the Jewish community as a peoplehood movement. But basically, I have a materialistic worldview and a scientific worldview and an allopathic worldview, a Western worldview. And, I'm popped into this new perspective. And the nervous system drops its fear because suddenly I'm like, oh, we are all connected because I feel it energetically, for lack of a better word. And then the dropping of the self for me, and maybe it's not true for everybody. I wonder if anybody has the experience of dropping the self and it feels worse. Well, the dropping of the self for me was blissful. And that's what happened in my spontaneous awakening, was instantaneous dropping of self connected to all that is, veils dropped. But I didn't have names for that, words for that. I didn't, but was immediately recognizable. So there's both in what we know, like the instant understanding of perennial wisdom and understanding of the wisdom traditions, and then and the metaphor, the meaning underneath, the threads that tie it together, and then the actual embodied experience of feeling the connection to all that is. So that happens. And so it took me, probably up into this moment to actually be able to speak that and believe it wholeheartedly, that it's not me making something up or being crazy. Because that's also the message, yeah. And that was the message that I got from the community that I was in, and including my family. So yeah. And I feel like it for me, because of where I was located in the world, it took a number of years for me to see myself being reflected back in the culture. Because not only did I have a spontaneous awakening, I was and I was dislocated in my family, who was not having the same experience as me. The spiritual communities that I ended up finding um, weren't reflecting back to me the experience that I was having. I was, of course, being reflected back a more patriarchal version of spirituality than what I was experiencing. I shouldn't say of course. I mean, how would you know? I had a very feminine awakening because I think I'd already had the mind awakening without the body awakening. I was already very compassionate intellectually, and also open-minded in that I believed that whatever was happening in this world around God, religion, all that is, was probably unknowable. So I would say that I probably already held that belief. But then, of course, I was also aware that I was holding beliefs on faith that I had no rational justification for. And that even my commitment to science was, in fact, a type of faith. All of that was already very, very well in my mind, and I say all this to say that I already had that flexibility of mind to be able to drop the story and understand that, well, one of my favorite things to say is no story is true. Um, Truly, all stories are partial. In other words, just right, like that what we can capture conceptually is smaller than what is. That's my direct experience. That's what I'm trying to communicate. So that is my direct experience. The words that we use and the thoughts that we think certainly are smaller than the what's available. And there's no way for me to, that's unfalsifiable and untestable. And when enough modern human beings are having this experience together, then we can create shared meaning around it, and it will become normatively true. In other words, this is a direct experience that doesn't yet have shared meaning making except among religious and mystical communities and maybe native and traditional communities. But it's a real thing. And we have a lot of people now in our culture, in the Western culture, who are in the position that I'm in, which is spontaneously awakened into the patriarchal spiritual world, very confused and beat up on both sides of it as I'm in the most feminine expression of my life. And I'll never be that way again because now I'm integrated and I no longer have those blind spots. Well, those blind spots were beautiful. They were very feminine and they received very interesting reflections. And I can share that. But what I really need to do, desire to do, is uh, somehow bring more compassion and understanding into whatever this is happening with these gender wars. It's terrible. And we're treating each other terribly. The women are treating the men terribly. The men are treating the women terribly. Some of them. I should not say all, not talking absolutes. I've noticed things. That's what I would like to talk about, what I notice. And then I'd like to talk about it from both sides or all sides with compassion. My experience, what I imagine is our women's experiences in general, the feminine experience in general. It's an imagination, of course. And then I can support that with uh, case studies and empirical studies that may investigate the female experience. One of the put in that. I'll come back to that. So I could talk to that. So it'd be my experience, it would be my imagination of women's experience, bolstered by case studies and empirical studies. And then his experience, imagined his experience. We imagined his experience, of course. And that would be better represented if I had a masculine partner to work with me on that one. So we'll see what happens. But I would like to offer my compassionate view. Smiling because there's a lot of outside noise. I don't know if you can hear it. That's okay. This is just a practice run. So so I could talk about his imagined perspective from a my imagined compassionate perspective. Yes, I think that's really important. Okay. Because one of the things I notice as a feminine expression of human being is that in the moment, when we take action, really, I mean, like anything, even just any word, there's usually multiple energies that are driving the expression in the moment. And we can look at the moments through different lenses and start to notice. So I mean, we need some good language to start talking about moments and what zooming in, what precision of moment am I talking about? Because there's like a moment, I just said a word, that's just a sentence, that's a moment. But then there's like the vignette, like a certain situational moment that has its own meaning and energy behind it. Let's call that a vignette. I can talk to the vignettes as I see them. And I can talk to the vignettes as I see them, not only as a compassionate woman, but as an industrial and organizational psychologist who has been looking and studying group human co-creation for decades. And most recently, and I'm talking decades, I have been most interested in interpersonal relationships and creating, I guess what you'd call new standards for interpersonal relating for teams, leadership, everywhere. And my ideas have changed and changed and changed and are constantly evolving. And they're evolving again now with like the burgeoning of AI and what the role of leadership is going to grow into. But no matter what that is, men and women need to get along and understand each other because we love each other too. Don't you see? There's usually multiple energies at work that give rise to any given vignette, if not any given moment, depending on how small you get those moments. And those energies, whatever energies come together to create the expression in the moment, some of them you're going to be aware of and they are socially acceptable and you are conscious of them. And some of them you are not going to be aware of and are also socially acceptable. But a lot of things that you're not going to be aware of are socially unacceptable things that you don't claim. They're in your shadow. They're your blind spot. But the thing is that our blind spots have evolved together. So we have blind spot dancing with blind spot and then pointing fingers at each other. Oh, look at that. Yeah, why not? Pointing fingers at each other. Um, blind spot to blind spot and not seeing that, well, your blind spots evolve together. So like it's neither one of your faults. It's protection versus protection. That's all it is. And that's what I noticed in my awakened state, in my awakening state. That's what I noticed. And my level of compassion was Olympic sized. I could look past and justify anything, a lot of things. And I did. And I feel a little bit exposed in what I just said there. Uh, that's an exaggeration, not anything. No. But I didn't see a lot of things. And I would label myself while I was in samadhi as being in, now I would label myself as being in what people would call spiritual bypass, which is normal. And we'll talk about that. It's a normal part of the awakening process. And codependency, which wasn't new with my awakening. That was just there. And that the right there is goes to show you that just because there is an awakening to presence or a connection to, I mean, some people will call it connection to all that is. These are all ways of explaining something that is a felt experience. That's why I like to use multiple ways of explaining, because it's really all of it's fuzzy. And that's a very feminine way to express. And I found my masculine counterparts who are in the awakening circles get very attached to meanings in their words. And that's one of the ways that we butt heads and cause friction, which is actually good. But, I got to find a man who believes friction is good. I've got to find somebody who's ready to like chisel away his marble. So to reveal his David. But you've already chiseled a lot away. Okay. Yeah. So I could talk to his perspective and her perspective from not only my own personal experience, but also as a seasoned expert in human group behavior. Plus, because my discipline is industrial and organizational psychology, we look at both the individual and the group. Yeah, both of those. And so we're looking at nature and nurture. Or there's a whole field in my field called individual differences, where we study ways to measure differences between individuals. Sorry for that circular definition. Individual differences, where we have a whole field that looks to like what makes one person different from another, usually mapped to some kind of performance criterion or outcome that we desire. And can we reliably measure that thing and operationalize it, define it, validate it, measure it, and predict. So big into the individual piece and also the group piece. And the reason that I lean into that is because I have been looking, at this edge for a really long time. And both are true, both are meaningful. There is an object and there is a subject. Both are true. Um, and the noticing that is important because there is also a really, really, really deep need for us, if we're going to break through this, and we will, to look at and understand power differentials, power disparity, so that leaning into the individual helps us understand the dynamics of power, which we must look at if we're going to look at how we're going to create harmony between the genders or the sexes, men and women. I like gender just because again, like I am a woman and I am feminine, but there's feminine energy in absolutely everyone. It is the receiving, it is the open, it is the revealing, it is the truth telling. It is the messy, it's the chaotic, it's the unknown. It's the space. And like everything, everything's fractal. But the feminine side is the one that leaning towards that, leaning towards open, leaning towards receiving, leaning towards unknown, leaning towards dark, leaning towards. So like in order for us to heal that relationship with that energy, which is in every single human being, and of course is the dominant energy in infants and children, for us as human beings, in order to heal that energy, men and women have to come together, because there are women on this earth that are wives. There are women on this earth that are wives. We're not all hysterical, emotional, crazy people as men like to paint us. And look, um, even in the spiritual world, most of the talking heads and the leaders in the spiritual communities are men. And I believe that is because men are better at structuring, they're better at storytelling. I say that with so much sadness because I'm really good at structuring and I'm a very good storyteller. However, I've been through so much trauma as an adult. I'm not, and and in one way, I'm grateful for my adult trauma because it helped me process my unprocessed childhood trauma. But now I have to like literally overcome my adult losses and trauma, and this is part of it. And I've already gone through the intellectual exercise of like weaving the intellectual ideas into the most compassionate story so that my mind can understand this where we're really needing to go, which is to that paradox of holding people as innocent in the moment and understanding that everybody's doing the best they can in the moment. And so they get to have compassion and holding them accountable for their patterns over space and time. And so their learning needs to occur. And I think one of the things that's most alarming in what I see happening right now in the way that we are treating each other in our culture, which is to shut each other out, lie, manipulate, treat each other like we're not human, dehumanize. We dehumanize each other. Alarmed. I'm alarmed at that. There's a dating a woman's dating methodology called burned haystack. And it's looking at rhetorical analysis of men in their dating profiles. And it's teaching women to notice patterns of coercive control, patterns of power that are being abused, which I could talk about that. Yes, we need to start noticing the different kinds of power and the way that they show up. Anyway, it's great in one way. And in another way, it's very destructive because these men are receiving no learning. They're just getting blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked. And wouldn't it be better if we like actually had, we need to have like an academy of some sort. Yeah, like that would be useful. Not an academy on how to manipulate and get around and use the right rhetoric. See, that's part of the problem too, is that those women have, believe me, those women have rhetorical patterns that would be identified by men as being red flags. And wouldn't it be better if we could learn together? We're going to have to, because what we're doing isn't going to work. Mm-mm. All right. So there I am. I just came up with an idea for a way to tell my story. I have this deep, deep desire to tell my personal story from a compassionate place and my learnings, especially the way that I was able to look very closely up because I was in the samadhi state. Okay. So I was looking very closely up at what I was receiving when I was in this very expanded feminine state. Okay. If anybody watched, thank you.